The shovel bit into frozen earth with a sound like breaking bones. Elias Boone paused, breath clouding in the bitter December air, and leaned on the worn handle. His shoulders ached from digging in the stubborn ground, but the hole wasn't yet deep enough. It never was the first time. The prairie wind howled through the sparse trees, carrying ice crystals that stung his weathered face. $20 for a grave. That's what his life had come to, digging holes for the dead in a godforsaken corner of Montana territory. He glanced at the wrapped bundle lying beside the half-dug grave. Small, too small for the usual clientele. The canvas shroud was bound with rope, concealing whatever poor soul lay inside. Elias hadn't asked questions when the man paid him. Questions meant trouble, and he'd had enough of that to last several lifetimes. Still, something about this job felt wrong. The stranger had been nervous eyes, darting like a spooked horse, insisting the grave be dug far from town, out by the abandoned Wheatley place where nobody ventured anymore. Just dig it and be done. Elias muttered to himself, returning to his labor. The hollow sound of metal striking frozen soil echoed across the empty landscape. Nobody would hear it out here. Nobody but him and whatever ghosts haunted this barren stretch of territory. A noise stopped him mid-swing, a soft, barely perceptible sound from the bundle. Elias froze, tilting his head to listen. There it was again, a muffled moan, so faint he almost believed he'd imagined it. But the third time it came, there was no mistaking it. Someone was alive in that shroud. His heart hammered against his ribs as he dropped the shovel and scrambled toward the bundle, fumbling with the tight knots. When they wouldn't yield, he yanked his hunting knife from his boot and sliced through the rope, unwrapping the canvas with trembling hands. What he found inside stole his breath. A woman lay there, her skin pale as moonlight against the dark fabric of an expensive dress. Purple bruises circled her slender neck like a macabre necklace. Her lips held a bluish tinge, but they parted slightly as another weak sound escaped them. Most striking of all, her eyes, the precise blue of a summer sky, fluttered open to meet his, filled with terror and confusion. Jesus Christ! Elias whispered instinctively, reaching to check her pulse. It fluttered weakly beneath his fingertips, a bird struggling to escape. Who did this to you? She couldn't answer, only managing another feeble moan. Her gaze pleaded with him in a way no words could. The wind howled louder, bringing with it the first flurries of snow. Nightfall was approaching, and with it, temperatures that would kill them both if they remained exposed. Decision made, Elias gathered the woman into his arms, surprised at how little she weighed, and carried her toward his horse. "I've got you," he said, though he doubted she could hear him. "I'm not burying anybody today." Silas stood on a three-legged stool by the stove, stirring a pot of beans with more concentration than the task required. At 10 years old, he took his responsibilities seriously, especially cooking dinner. Elias had left hours ago, promising to return before dark, but the window already showed more black than blue. The boy wasn't worried exactly Elias could handle himself, but the waiting made him restless. When hoofbeats approached the cabin, Silas abandoned the spoon and raced to the window, his uneven gait a reminder of the accident that had claimed his parents 2 years prior. Relief flooded him at the sight of Elias's familiar silhouette, but confusion quickly followed. The rancher wasn't alone. Someone or something was draped across his saddle. "Silas," Elias called as he dismounted, struggling with his burden. "Clear the table, quick." The boy moved with surprising speed, sweeping Elias's maps and ledgers onto the floor, just as the door burst open. Elias entered, backward arms full with what Silas now saw was a woman unconscious, deathly pale and dressed too finely for these parts. "Who is she?" Silas asked, eyes wide, as Elias laid her on the rough-hewn table. "Don't know," Elias replied, already working to remove her snow-dampened outer garments. "Found her out by Wheatley's old place. Someone paid me to bury her, but she's alive." Silas's brow furrowed. Bury her, but that's murder. Yes. Elias's voice was grim as he checked her pulse again. Get the whiskey and the medicine box, and more blankets. She's cold as winter. As Silas scurried to gather supplies, Elias studied the woman more carefully. She was young, perhaps 25, with features that spoke of gentle breeding rather than frontier hardship. Her dark hair fell in waves around a face that might have been beautiful, if not for its current pallor. The bruises on her neck were deliberate. Someone had tried to strangle her. But there was something else wrong, too. Her breathing was shallow, labored. Poison, came a raspy whisper, startling him. Her eyes had opened, those incredible blue eyes, now clouded with pain. He poisoned me. Who? Elias leaned closer, trying to catch her faint words. Lan. She struggled to form the name, each syllable clearly costing her. Briggs. Elias felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the winter air. Harlan Briggs was the largest rancher in the territory, a man with money power and the ears of every official for 50 miles. A man who collected land like some collected coins and who hadn't been particular about how he acquired it. Harlan Briggs tried to kill you, he asked softly. Her eyes closed again, strength failing. But she managed a slight nod before slipping back into unconsciousness. Silas returned, arms full of supplies. Is she gonna die, Elias? Elias took the whiskey bottle and medicine box, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. Not if we can help it. He looked at the woman's ashen face. She said she was poisoned. By Harlan Briggs. Silas's eyes widened. Everyone knew that name, even children. Why would he want to kill her? That, Elias said grimly, is what I intend to find out. Morning brought weak sunlight, filtering through frost-covered windows and the woman's first lucid moments. Elias had spent the night forcing activated charcoal and water down her throat, an old remedy his grandmother had sworn by for poisonings. Whether it had helped or she was simply strong enough to survive, her eyes were clear when they opened, focusing immediately on Elias as he checked her pulse. You didn't bury me, she said, her voice still rough but stronger than before. No, ma'am, I didn't. Elias retreated slightly, giving her space. Custom is to make sure folks are dead first. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Uncommon courtesy in these parts. Elias poured her a cup of water, helping her sit up enough to drink it. She winced at the movement, one hand going to her bruised neck. I'm Elias Boone. The boy over there trying not to stare is Silas. Silas promptly ducked his head, embarrassed at being caught. Annabeth, she replied. Annabeth Crow. She hesitated, then added, though they've been calling me Mrs. Briggs for 6 months now. Elias couldn't hide his surprise. You're Harlan Briggs's wife, widow according to him. Bitterness edged her words. He must be telling everyone I died of fever. More respectable than having a runaway bride. He didn't just tell people you died, Elias said carefully. He paid to make sure of it. Comprehension dawned in her eyes, followed by horror. The man who brought me to you paid $20 to dig a grave and keep quiet about it. Elias didn't mention how close he'd come to earning that money before hearing her movement. Some sins were best kept private. Who was he? Fletcher, probably. Briggs's foreman. She tried to sit up further and grimaced. He's the one who caught me trying to escape. After that. Her hand went to her throat again. Silas approached cautiously, curiosity overcoming shyness. Why'd you marry Mr. Briggs if you don't like him? Silas. Elias scolded. That's not our business. It's all right. Annabeth's eyes held a weariness beyond her years. I didn't choose to marry him. My father did before he died. I inherited land from my mother, good land, with 3 year-round springs that don't dry up in summer. Briggs wanted it. She took another sip of water. Father was in debt. The marriage settled it. I was the price. Elias had heard such stories before. The frontier was hard on everyone, but especially on women with property and no male relatives to protect them. The poison, foxglove, I think, in my tea. Her gaze hardened. When I realized what was happening, I tried to run. That's when Fletcher caught me. Silas frowned. But why try to kill you if you're married? Don't your springs belong to Mr. Briggs now anyway? A bitter smile curved Annabeth's lips. That's the thing about marriage contracts. Mine had conditions. The land remains mine, unless I bear Briggs a son or die childless. If I'd managed to escape, I could have contested the marriage. But a dead wife can't object to anything. Elias processed this information slowly, understanding the deadly calculation Briggs had made. You need to rest. We'll figure out what to do when you're stronger. There's nothing to figure out. Annabeth said, her voice suddenly sharp with fear. If Briggs discovers I'm alive, he'll finish what he started, and anyone helping me will suffer the same fate. Elias met her gaze steadily. Let me worry about that. You don't understand. He owns half the territory. The sheriff, the judge, they all dine at his table. Maybe so. Elias stood, his decision made. But they don't own me, and this is still my home. You're safe here until you can travel. After that, it's your choice where you go. As he turned to stoke the fire, Elias caught Silas watching him with an expression that mingled admiration and concern. The boy understood what sheltering Annabeth Crow meant, that they were setting themselves against the most powerful man in the territory. It was foolish, possibly suicidal. But some lines couldn't be uncrossed, and Elias had crossed his the moment he cut those ropes instead of covering her with dirt. Days passed as winter tightened its grip on the land. Annabeth regained strength slowly, the poison working its way out of her system. She began helping with small tasks, mending clothes, preparing meals, insisting on earning her keep despite Elias's protests. Silas took to her immediately, chattering about his books and inventions, soaking up her attention like a plant turning toward sunlight. Elias watched their growing bond with mixed emotions. The boy needed a woman's influence, something Elias could never provide. But attachment meant pain when Annabeth eventually left as she must. This temporary arrangement couldn't last, not with Harlan Briggs believing his wife safely buried. On the 7th night, Elias returned from checking his meager herd to find Annabeth seated before the fire. Her hair loose around her shoulders, the bruises on her neck now faded to yellowish smudges. Silas was asleep, and the cabin felt different somehow, warmer despite the howling storm outside. "You should grow it back," she said when he entered, nodding toward his close-cropped beard. Elias hung his coat before answering. "Had a beard most of my life. Cut it off after Sarah died. Seemed right somehow." "Your wife?" Annabeth asked gently. "Yes. 3 years ago. Fever took her and our daughter both." The words still burned his throat like whiskey. "Silas is my brother's boy. When Joseph and Mary died in the wagon accident, there was no one else." Annabeth nodded, understanding in her eyes. Loss was a language everyone on the frontier spoke fluently. "He's lucky to have you. Other way around most days." Elias sat heavily in the chair opposite her, stretching his boots toward the fire. "Boy keeps me honest. Gives me reason to get up when the world seems determined to knock me down." "Is that why you saved me, because Silas was watching?" The question caught him off guard. "No. I saved you because you weren't dead. Many would have considered that an inconvenience rather than a moral obligation." She studied him with those clear blue eyes. "Especially given the circumstances." "I'm not most men." "No," she agreed softly, "you're not." Something passed between them, then a recognition that neither was prepared to name. Elias cleared his throat and looked away first. "We need supplies. I'll ride into town tomorrow." Is that safe? What if Fletcher or Briggs's men see you? It's a risk we have to take. Food's running low, and we need medicine for you. He met her concerned gaze. Don't worry. Nobody knows you're here, and I've been careful. To everyone in town, I'm just a struggling rancher buying supplies. Annabeth didn't seem convinced, but she nodded. Please, be careful. Always am. Elias managed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Get some rest. Storm's likely to keep us all inside tomorrow. As he prepared for bed, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that their fragile peace was about to shatter. 6 years in Montana had taught him to read the signs in weather in cattle and men, and everything in him sensed trouble brewing, as tangible as the storm raging outside. Pine Creek was hardly more than a gathering of buildings clinging to existence on the prairie, a general store saloon smithy, and a handful of other establishments serving the scattered ranches of the region. Elias tethered his horse outside Mercer's store, stamping his feet against the cold before entering. The bell above the door announced his arrival, drawing the attention of the 3 customers already inside. Conversation died as Elias approached the counter, a silence that spoke volumes. Jim Mercer, normally talkative to a fault, merely nodded in greeting. Morning, Jim. Need flour, coffee, sugar? Some of those tinned peaches if you've got them. Elias kept his tone casual, though tension coiled in his gut. Something was wrong. Feeding an army boon. The question came from behind him, accompanied by the distinctive jingle of spurs. Elias turned slowly to face Sheriff Daggett, a man whose badge had been purchased with Briggs's money as surely as if he'd paid cash for it. Just stocking up. Winter's not done with us yet. Daggert's smile didn't reach his eyes. Heard you were out by the old Wheatley place last week. The statement hung in the air, a challenge poorly disguised as conversation. Elias shrugged, keeping his expression neutral. Checking fence lines. Why? Funny thing. Daggett continued as if Elias hadn't spoken. One of Briggs's men was out that way too. Said he saw fresh digging. The sheriff leaned closer. You taking up gardening in December, Boone? Burying a horse. Elias lied smoothly. Lost an old mare to colic. Grounds frozen solid closer to home. Daggett studied him, clearly skeptical. That right, because word is Briggs's wife took ill suddenly. Passed in the night. Very sad affair. I wouldn't know about that. Elias turned back to Mercer. Those supplies, Jim. The storekeeper busied himself gathering the items, clearly uncomfortable with the tension between the 2 men. Course you wouldn't. Daggett set his tone, suggesting the opposite. Just like you wouldn't know anything about a grave that seems to have been dug and then abandoned. Strange coincidence, that's all. Elias counted out coins for his purchases, pulse hammering in his ears. Life's full of those. Indeed it is. Daggett adjusted his hat. Give my regards to the boy, and any other guests you might be hosting. The threat wasn't veiled enough to miss. Elias gathered his supplies without responding, mind racing. They knew, or at least suspected. Which meant Annabeth wasn't safe. None of them were. As he mounted his horse, Elias scanned the street with new awareness. 2 riders outside the saloon watched him too intently, and another man he recognized as working Briggs's range loitered by the blacksmith. Eyes followed his progress out of town, and he fought the urge to spur his horse to a gallop. Speed would only confirm their suspicions. Instead, he took a circuitous route home, doubling back several times to ensure he wasn't followed. Each time he paused to listen, the silence of the winter landscape seemed to press against his eardrums, too quiet, too perfect. His fingers itched to reach for the rifle in its scabbard, but he resisted. No point shooting at shadows. It wasn't until he crossed Miller's Creek, a frozen ribbon cutting through pine forests 5 miles from his cabin, that he spotted the tracks. Fresh hoof prints, at least 6 horses cutting across his own trail from earlier that morning, and continuing in the direction of his property. Not hunters, not trappers. Not this time of year. Elias's blood went cold. They had found them. Abandoning caution, he spurred his horse into a gallop, racing the setting sun. The supplies bounced and threatened to spill from his saddlebags, but he paid them no mind. All that mattered was reaching the cabin before Briggs's men. Before they found Annabeth, the smell of smoke reached him first, acrid and unmistakable. Then through the trees, he caught sight of flames, bright, voracious flames, devouring the roof of the cabin he had built with his own hands. The barn was already gone, just smoldering timbers outlined against the darkening sky. No, he whispered, the word tearing from his throat. No. Elias drew his rifle and urged his terrified horse forward, caution forgotten. As he burst into the clearing, he took in the scene with one desperate glance, the cabin consumed by fire. No sign of movement, no sign of life. The riders were gone, leaving only hoofprints and destruction. He leapt from the saddle before his horse had fully stopped racing toward the burning structure. The heat drove him back, searing his lungs with each gasping breath. "Silas!" he shouted, circling desperately, searching for any way in. Annabeth, a sound faint but distinct, made him whirl toward the root cellar, a half-buried structure 20 yards from the cabin. The wooden doors were closed, a heavy timber braced across them from the outside. Someone had sealed it shut. Elias tore the timber away and yanked the doors open. Smoke immediately billowed out, followed by the sound of desperate coughing. A small figure emerged, soot blackened and tear-streaked. Silas. Elias gathered the boy into his arms, relief washing over him. Thank God. Where's Annabeth? The boy's eyes were wild with terror. They took her, Elias. They found us and took her. Silas's account emerged in fragments as they huddled beside the creek, the only place far enough from the heat of the burning cabin to be bearable. Fletcher and 3 of Briggs's men had arrived shortly after midday, surrounding the cabin before they knew what was happening. They dragged Annabeth out by her hair, laughing when she fought back. Fletcher had struck her unconscious when she spat in his face. I tried to stop them. Silas said, his small frame shaking with cold and delayed shock. But one of them threw me in the cellar. Said burning was too good for me, wanted me to suffocate slow. Tears streaked the soot on his face. I heard them arguing about whether to just shoot you when you got back. Fletcher said no, said Briggs wanted to do it himself. Elias's mind raced, weighing options that all seemed equally hopeless. Briggs would have taken Annabeth back to Twin Rivers Ranch, his fortress 40 miles to the west. By now she'd be locked away, possibly already dead. No, he wouldn't think that way. If Briggs had simply wanted her dead, Fletcher would have finished the job here. The fact that they'd taken her alive meant Briggs had other plans, forced signing of property documents perhaps, or a staged reconciliation to legitimize his claim to her land. Either way, it bought them time. Not much, but some. We need help, Elias said, making his decision. And I know where to find it. Nathan Packer's printing office in Pine Creek was dark when they arrived, slipping through back alleys to avoid being seen. The editor was known for working late, but tonight the building stood silent. Elias rapped on the rear door, 3 short knocks, a pause, then 2 more. When no answer came, he tried the handle and found it unlocked. A warning sign in itself. The main room was empty, the printing press idle. Papers were scattered across the floor, a chair overturned, signs of a struggle. Elias's heart sank. Had Briggs eliminated this potential ally as well? Mr. Packer. Silas called softly, moving toward the back office. A groan answered him. They found the editor slumped behind his desk, blood matting his hair, one eye swollen shut. He startled at their approach, raising a trembling hand in self-defense. It's Elias Boone. Elias reassured him, kneeling to check his injuries. What happened, Fletcher? Packer winced as Elias examined the wound on his scalp. Came looking for information about you. Seemed to think I might know something. A pained smile twisted his lips. I convinced him otherwise. They took Annabeth, Elias said grimly. Burned my place to the ground. Understanding dawned in Packer's good eye. So the rumors are true. Briggs's dead wife isn't so dead after all. Elias nodded. She has documents proving her claim to land Briggs wants. He tried to kill her once. He'll try again. What do you need from me? A way to reach the territorial judge in Helena. Someone beyond Briggs's influence. Packer struggled to his feet, wavering slightly. Judge Hollister, man of integrity. I can write you a letter of introduction. He fumbled for paper and pen. But getting to Helena won't be easy. Briggs will have men watching the roads. We'll manage. Elias's voice was hard with determination. As Packer wrote, Silas explored the office, pausing at a shelf of back issues. Elias, look at this. The boy pulled out a yellowed newspaper from 3 years earlier. The headline caught Elias's attention immediately. Mysterious disappearance of Spring Creek. Settlers raises questions. Below it, a smaller subheading, Third family to abandon valuable water rights near Briggs' property. This ain't the first time, Silas said softly. He's done it before. Elias scanned the article quickly. 3 families who had settled on land adjacent to what was now Briggs's property had vanished without explanation between 1874 and 1877. No bodies found, no formal investigations completed. The newspaper had raised questions about the coincidental timing of their disappearances and Briggs's subsequent acquisition of their land rights. Keep that, he told Silas. Evidence of a pattern might help convince the judge. Packer finished his letter, sealing it with wax. Take the back roads to Helena. Travel by night if you can. There's an army outpost at Fort Harrison. If you can reach it, you'll be under federal protection. Elias took the letter, tucking it securely inside his coat. What about you? You're not safe here. I'll manage. Got a hideout at my brother's place outside town. Packer's good eye glinted with sudden fire. Besides, someone needs to start printing the truth about Harlan Briggs. Been waiting years for enough evidence to nail that bastard. They left Packer preparing to evacuate his office, loading a small printing press into a concealed compartment beneath his wagon. The storm had passed, leaving a crystalline night sky, blazing with stars, the air so cold it hurt to breathe. Somewhere out there under those same stars, Annabeth was imprisoned by the man who had already tried to kill her once. Elias lifted Silas onto his horse, the boy's exhausted body barely able to stay upright. We'll ride through the night, he said, swinging into the saddle behind him. Rest when we have to. Make Helena by tomorrow night if we're lucky. Silas leaned back against his chest, voice slurred with fatigue. Will they hurt her, Elias? The question pierced Elias's heart like a blade. He wanted to offer reassurance, to promise that everything would be all right. But the lie stuck in his throat. Annabeth is strong, he said instead. Stronger than Briggs knows. She'll hold on until we bring help. As they rode away from Pine Creek, Elias felt the weight of a blood oath settling on his shoulders. If Briggs harmed one hair on Annabeth's head, there wouldn't be a force in heaven or hell that could stop what would follow. The thought should have frightened him. He had always been a peaceful man. But instead, it brought a cold clarity. Some evils could only be answered one way. They rode hard through the night, pushing their exhausted mount to its limits. By dawn, they had covered 20 miles of rough terrain, staying well clear of main roads. The horse could go no further without rest. They made camp in a sheltered ravine, sharing the meager supplies Packer had provided. Silas fell asleep, instantly curled against Elias's side for warmth. Elias remained awake, staring at the lightening sky. Mind filled with images of Annabeth, her eyes when they'd first opened in that shroud. Her smile when Silas made her laugh, her quiet strength as she helped around the cabin, despite her own trauma. She had begun to mean something to him, something he hadn't felt since Sarah died. The possibility that he might lose her too twisted in his gut like a knife. "I'm coming," he whispered to the dawn. "Hold on, Annabeth, I'm coming." Twin Rivers Ranch sprawled across a fertile valley protected by pine-covered ridges on 3 sides. From his vantage point on the northern slope, Elias studied the layout through Packer's battered field glass. The main house, a 2-story structure of local stone and timber, stood at the center of a complex that included barns, bunkhouses, corrals, and outbuildings. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and men moved about the yard more than the usual complement of ranch hands. Briggs was clearly expecting trouble. Their journey to Helena had been cut short 12 hours earlier when they'd encountered a patrol of Briggs's men on the eastern road. Only blind luck and quick thinking had saved them ducking into a frozen creek bed seconds before the riders crested the hill that would have exposed them. The close call had forced a change in plans. They couldn't reach Helena in time to save Annabeth. They would have to act directly. "What do you see?" Silas whispered, huddled beside him in the snow. Elias passed him the field glass. "Guards posted, at least 15 men visible. Briggs isn't taking chances. Where would they keep her? Main house, probably." Elias pointed to the stone structure. "Second floor if he's smart. Only 1 staircase to defend." Fear clouded Silas's eyes. "We can't fight that many, Elias." "No, we can't." Elias rubbed his stubbled jawline, working furiously. "But we might not have to. Look there." He directed Silas's attention to the eastern perimeter. "See that small cabin by the creek? That's where the water comes from one of the springs Briggs wanted so badly. There'll be a pump house nearby bringing water to the main buildings." Understanding dawned on the boy's face. "A way in, maybe." Elias had worked enough ranches to know how water systems were constructed. Underground pipes, usually. Maintenance tunnels sometimes, especially in harsh climates where freezing was a concern. A risk, but possibly their only chance. They retreated from the ridge to their makeshift camp where their horse rested behind a stand of pines. Elias laid out their meager resources, his rifle with 30 rounds of ammunition, a hunting knife, Packer's revolver with 6 bullets, a length of rope matches, and a small flask of whiskey. "Not much of an arsenal," he muttered. Silas watched him with solemn eyes. "What's the plan?" "Wait for nightfall. Find the pump house. Look for access to the water system." Elias met the boy's gaze directly. "I go in alone. You stay with the horse ready to ride if things go wrong. I want to help. You are helping. I need someone I can trust to get word to Helena if I don't come back." Elias gripped the boy's shoulder. "Promise me, Silas. If I'm not back by dawn, you ride for Fort Harrison. Find Judge Hollister. Give him Packer's letter and tell him everything." Tears welled in Silas's eyes, but he nodded bravely. "I promise." As dusk approached, Elias checked his weapons one final time. He removed his heavy coat, it would only restrict movement, and blackened his face with ash from their small fire to blend with the shadows. To Silas, he must have looked like a ghost, or perhaps something darker. "Remember dawn," he said, ruffling the boy's hair one last time. Not a minute later, he descended toward Twin Rivers Ranch, like a shadow among shadows, moving with the stealth of a man who had spent his life in wild country. The temperature was dropping rapidly, the earlier clouds clearing to reveal stars like chips of ice in a black sky. His breath clouded before him, then disappeared as he controlled his breathing, shallow and silent. The spring cabin was unguarded. Why waste manpower on an empty building when the real prize was locked in the main house? Elias slipped inside, finding it just as he'd expected, a simple structure built around the natural spring that bubbled up from underground. A series of pipes channeled the water in different directions, including one large main that led toward the ranch buildings. Beside it, a narrow maintenance tunnel just wide enough for a man to crawl through. Elias pried open the access panel and peered into darkness. The smell of damp earth and minerals rose to meet him. Without hesitation, he slid inside, pulling the panel closed behind him. The tunnel was tight, barely wider than his shoulders, and utterly black. He inched forward on his belly, using his elbows to pull himself along the cold metal of the water pipe, his only guide. Time lost meaning in that lightless passage. It might have been minutes or hours each forward movement, a battle against the growing sense of confinement. Elias had never feared small spaces, but the absolute darkness and the weight of earth above pressed on his mind like physical threats. He forced himself to focus on Annabeth, her face, her voice, the quiet strength that had impressed him from the beginning. For her, he would crawl through hell itself. Finally, the tunnel widened slightly, the pipe angling upward. His questing hand found another access panel. Listening intently, he heard only the faint gurgle of water in the pipes. Slowly, carefully, he pushed the panel open and emerged into a dimly lit room, a cellar of some kind, filled with barrels and storage crates. Elias drew his knife, moving silently toward a wooden staircase at the far end. A single oil lamp hung from a hook, casting grotesque shadows across the rough stone walls. He extinguished it with a quick pinch of his fingers, plunging the cellar into darkness more comfortable than the light had been. At the top of the stairs, a door stood slightly ajar. Voices filtered through, men talking, the clatter of dishes, occasional laughter. The kitchen, he guessed. Servants preparing a late meal. He would need to find another way up. Retreat and reconnaissance, and the first rule of survival in hostile territory. Elias backed away from the door, searching for alternatives. A dumbwaiter built into the wall caught his attention, a small freight elevator used to move food and supplies between floors. It would be a tight fit, but possible. The mechanism was simple, counterweighted to move up or down without noise. Elias folded his frame into the small space knees drawn to his chest and pulled the inner door closed. Slowly, he worked the pulley system, raising himself inch by precarious inch. Through the slats in the dumbwaiter door, he caught glimpses of the kitchen, 3 women working by lamplight, too busy to notice the slight movement of the service elevator as it passed. The shaft continued upward. Elias stopped at the next level, peering through the slats into what appeared to be a formal dining room. Empty, thankfully. He continued upward to the final stop, the second floor, where he believed they were holding Annabeth. He opened the dumbwaiter door a crack, listening intently. A hallway stretched before him, carpeted to muffle footsteps, lined with doors. At the far end, a man sat on a straight-backed chair, rifle across his knees. Guard duty, and looking none too happy about it. The guard's posture, slumped shoulders, head, nodding slightly, suggested he'd been there a while. Perhaps getting drowsy. Elias scanned the hallway for other threats before easing himself out of the dumbwaiter. His stiff muscles protested after the long confinement, but he forced himself to move smoothly, silently, keeping to the deeper shadows along the wall. 4 doors lined each side of the hall. Behind one, Annabeth waited. Behind others, possibly more guards, or Briggs himself. A muffled sound from the 3rd door on the right caught his attention, a soft thump as if someone had knocked something over. The guard's head snapped up, eyes focusing on the same door. He rose, rifle at the ready, and approached. "Quiet in there." The guard hissed, rapping his knuckles against the wood. "Mr. Briggs said you're to have no supper if you keep making noise." No answer came, but the guard seemed satisfied, returning to his chair with a muttered curse about stubborn women. Elias had his target. Now he needed a distraction. He withdrew silently, returning to the dumbwaiter. Descending to the dining room level, he slipped out and made his way to a cabinet displaying expensive china. With careful deliberation, he selected a heavy crystal decanter and returned to the hallway. One chance, one distraction. It had to work. Taking position at the far end of the hall from the guard, Elias took a deep breath. Then he hurled the decanter down the stairwell leading to the first floor. The resulting crash echoed like a gunshot in the quiet house, followed by shouts of alarm from below. The guard leapt to his feet, momentarily confused about which direction to investigate. Self-preservation won out. He headed for the stairs toward the sound and toward potential backup, rather than deeper into the hallway where unknown threats might wait. The moment the guard's back was turned, Elias moved. 3 swift strides brought him to the door. It was locked as expected. He drew his knife, working it between door and frame near the latch. Years of breaking into his own cabin when he'd lost the key served him well. The lock gave with a soft click. He slipped inside, closing the door silently behind him. The room was dark, save for moonlight filtering through a small window. A figure sat on the bed, tense and alert, something clutched in her hands, a makeshift weapon, he realized. Ready to fight. "Annabeth," he whispered, "it's Elias." She froze, disbelief warring with hope on her face. "Elias, how?" "No time." He crossed to her knife, already cutting the ropes that bound her ankles to the bed frame. "We need to move. Now. Briggs will kill you if he finds you here." She whispered, fear and concern mingling in her voice. "He'll have to catch me first." Elias helped her stand, steadying her as she swayed slightly. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious." The bruise darkening her cheekbones suggested otherwise, but her eyes were clear and determined. "They need me alive to sign papers. Briggs has been persuasive." The way she said the word made Elias's blood boil. "Can you walk?" "Yes." She straightened, gathering her strength. "How do we get out?" "The way I came in. It's tight, but—" The door burst open, flooding the room with lamplight. Fletcher stood in the doorway, pistol already drawn and aimed. Behind him, 2 more men with rifles blocked any escape. "Well now," the foreman drawled, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Seems we caught ourselves a hero." Elias positioned himself between Annabeth and the guns, mind-racing for options that didn't exist. He still held his knife useless against firearms at this distance. His own pistol was tucked into his waistband, but he'd never reach it in time. "Fletcher," he acknowledged calmly, as if they'd met on the street in town. "Figured you'd be involved in this ugliness." "Shut up and put your hands where I can see them." Fletcher gestured with his pistol. "Mr. Briggs is going to want to have a word with you, personal-like." From below came the sound of heavy footsteps ascending the stairs, then a familiar voice that made Annabeth tense behind him. "And what in God's name is going on up here?" Harlan Briggs appeared in the doorway, pushing past his men. He stopped short at the sight of Elias. "Boone? How the hell did you get in here?" "Your security has holes." Elias replied evenly, hands still at his sides despite Fletcher's command. "Might want to look into that." Briggs's face darkened with fury. He was a large man, expensively dressed, with the florid complexion of someone accustomed to good living. But his eyes were cold as a rattlesnake's. "I should have had Fletcher put a bullet in you when he had the chance," he said softly. "Burn your miserable cabin with you inside it. Yet here I am." Elias felt Annabeth's hand grip the back of his shirt, drawing strength from his presence. "And there she is, alive despite your best efforts." "My wife is mentally unwell." Briggs replied smoothly, his tone shifting to one of practiced concern. "Suffering delusions, I'm afraid. And you, Mr. Boone, have interfered in a private family matter." "Delusions." Elias couldn't keep the contempt from his voice. Like the foxglove in her tea, the bruises on her neck, or maybe like the 3 other families who mysteriously disappeared from land, you wanted. Something flashed in Briggs's eyes, surprise quickly masked. "I don't know what nonsense you're talking about." Spring Creek Settlers, 1874 to 1877. Elias pressed buying time, searching for any advantage. Homesteaders who vanished after refusing to sell water rights. Packer wrote about it in his paper. Maybe they're buried near where you tried to put Annabeth. Enough. Briggs's facade cracked. Fletcher, take him downstairs. We'll deal with this privately. As Fletcher moved forward, pistol raised, a commotion erupted from the hallway, shouts, a gunshot, the sound of breaking glass. Everyone froze, attention momentarily diverted. Sir, one of Briggs's men appeared in the doorway, breathless. Riders coming in, a whole company of them, torches lit. Briggs pushed past him to the window, yanking back the curtain. His face went ashen at whatever he saw. Who are they, army vigilantes? Don't look like army, the man replied. Just a bunch of riders, 20, maybe more. Elias felt a surge of hope. Had Packer somehow rallied help, or was this something else entirely? The sound of a rifle being cocked brought everyone's attention back to the room. Fletcher had his gun trained steadily on Elias's chest. What do you want us to do with these two, Mr. Briggs? For a moment, indecision warred on Briggs's face. Then his expression hardened into something terrible. Kill him. Make it look like he attacked my wife and I defended her. Self-defense clear as day. And the riders? Fletcher asked. I'll handle them. Briggs straightened his vest, composure returning. Whoever they are, they can't prove anything if Boone is dead, and my wife confirms my version of events. He turned cold eyes to Annabeth. Which she will, unless she wants the boy to meet the same fate. Annabeth went rigid behind Elias. You wouldn't. Try me. Briggs's smile was devoid of humanity. Fletcher, do it now. Clean shot, nothing messy. The foreman raised his pistol, taking careful aim at Elias's heart. Time seemed to slow, each heartbeat stretching into eternity. Elias tensed, preparing for one desperate lunge that would almost certainly fail. A tremendous crash shook the house, the front door being broken down. Shouts filled the lower level, boots pounding on the stairs. Briggs, a voice bellowed. This is Marshal Clancy, you're surrounded. Fletcher's momentary distraction was all Elias needed. He threw himself forward, knife flashing in the lamplight. The blade sank into Fletcher's forearm just as the pistol discharged, sending a bullet wide into the ceiling. They crashed to the floor together, Elias driving his weight into the larger man, fighting for control of the weapon. Chaos erupted around them. Briggs bolted from the room, shoving past his stunned men. Annabeth seized a heavy candlestick from the bedside table and swung it with all her might at one of the remaining guards, catching him across the temple. He dropped like a stone. The other guard raised his rifle, torn between targets. Before he could decide, the doorway filled with armed men wearing U.S. Marshal badges, guns drawn. Federal marshals, drop your weapons. Fletcher, still struggling with Elias, tried to bring his pistol around for another shot. A marshal's revolver cracked, and the foreman screamed as a bullet shattered his shoulder. The pistol clattered to the floor. Elias rolled away, breathing hard, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead where Fletcher had struck him with the pistol butt. Through the haze of battle, he sought Annabeth and found her standing against the wall, pale but unharmed. A familiar figure pushed through the marshals, Nathan Packer, his face still bruised, but his good eye bright with triumph. Told you I'd start printing the truth about Briggs, he said, helping Elias to his feet. Turns out folks were eager to hear it. These gentlemen, he gestured to the marshals, were particularly interested in the evidence I'd gathered over the years. How? Elias managed, still dazed from the fight. Helena Telegraph Office, Packer explained. Got a message through about Briggs kidnapping a woman already declared dead. Mentioned those old disappearances too. Marshal Clancy here was investigating them already. A tall, weathered lawman stepped forward, holstering his weapon. Been building a case against Briggs for months. Your information was the last piece we needed. He nodded respectfully to Annabeth. "Ma'am, you're safe now." "Briggs," she said urgently. "He ran. He'll escape." "Not likely," Clancy replied with grim satisfaction. "We've got men at every exit, and even if he slips past them, there's nowhere in the territory he can hide now." As if to confirm his words, shouts erupted from outside, followed by a single gunshot. Everyone tensed, marshals moving toward the windows. "I got him," someone called from the yard below. Tried to run for the stables. Relief swept through Elias so intensely that his knees nearly buckled. It was over. Truly over. He looked to Annabeth, finding her eyes already on him, filled with the same stunned realization. "Silas," she said suddenly, alarm crossing her face. "Where's Silas?" "Safe," Elias assured her. "Waiting with the horses up on the ridge. I wouldn't bring him into this." She nodded, tension easing from her shoulders. Then, without warning, she crossed the room and threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. Elias hesitated only a moment before embracing her one hand, cradling the back of her head as she trembled against him. "I knew you'd come," she whispered so quietly that only he could hear. "I knew you wouldn't leave me here." Something tight and frozen in Elias's chest began to thaw, a warmth he thought lost forever spreading through him. He had no words to answer her faith in him, so he simply held her tighter, a promise without language. Marshal Clancy cleared his throat discreetly. "We'll need statements from both of you. And there's the matter of those earlier disappearances. If Briggs was involved, he was," Annabeth said, pulling away from Elias, but remaining close to his side. "He boasted about it when he thought I was helpless. Said I should be grateful he bothered with marriage. The others just vanished when they wouldn't sell." Clancy's expression darkened. "Then we have more graves to find, but that's for tomorrow." He gestured to his men to secure Fletcher and the other subdued guard. "Tonight you both need rest and medical attention." As they were led from the room that had been Annabeth's prison, Elias's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. Whatever came next, investigations, testimonies, the slow grinding wheels of territorial justice, they would face it together. Some bonds once formed in fire and danger could never be broken. The journey to Helena took 3 days, their small party joining a larger convoy of marshals escorting the prisoners. Briggs rode in sullen silence, wrists and ankles shackled, the once powerful rancher reduced to just another criminal bound for judgment. Fletcher, his wounded shoulder roughly bandaged, cursed constantly until one of the marshals threatened to gag him. Silas had been overjoyed at their return, flinging himself into Elias's arms with such force that both nearly toppled from the horse. The boy had kept his promise, staying hidden until they came for him, though Elias later learned he'd crept close enough to the ranch to witness the marshal's arrival. The scolding Elias intended died on his lips at the fierce pride in Silas's eyes. The boy had the makings of a man already. Helena greeted them with curious stares and newspaper headlines. Word of Harlan Briggs's arrest had spread rapidly, each telling more sensational than the last. Packer, riding alongside them, gleefully collected every paper they passed, reading aloud the most dramatic passages to general amusement. "And listen to this one," he called, waving the Helena Independent. "Rancher's resurrection, dead wife returns to accuse murderous husband. They've made you into quite the avenging angel, Mrs. Briggs." Annabeth, riding beside Elias, grimaced. "Hardly an angel, just a woman who refused to stay buried." "Best kind there is," Packer replied with a wink of his good eye. Judge Hollister received them in his chambers immediately upon arrival, his imposing appearance belied by the compassion in his eyes, as Annabeth recounted her ordeal. The evidence was overwhelming testimony from multiple witnesses, Annabeth's marriage contract showing Briggs's motive, the medical examination confirming poisoning and strangulation attempts, and most damning of all, Briggs's own boasts about previous victims. The territorial prosecutor will file charges of attempted murder, kidnapping, arson, and conspiracy, Hollister informed them when the statements were complete. We'll add additional charges as evidence of the earlier disappearances is uncovered. Briggs won't see freedom again in this lifetime. The legal proceedings moved with surprising swiftness, driven by Hollister's determination and the territorial governor's desire to demonstrate that even the wealthiest settlers weren't above the law. Within a week, grand jury indictments were handed down against Briggs Fletcher and several accomplices, including Sheriff Daggett. During that week, Elias, Annabeth, and Silas stayed at a modest boarding house near the courthouse, their rooms paid for by the territorial government as witnesses in a capital case. It was the most comfortable accommodation Elias had experienced in years. Real beds with clean linens, hot meals served 3 times daily, even hot water for bathing. Silas reveled in the novelty, especially the desserts that appeared with dinner each evening. For Elias, the greatest comfort was watching Annabeth recover her strength and spirit. Each day brought more color to her cheeks, more confidence to her movements. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes since he'd first seen them open in that shroud gradually faded, replaced by a clear-eyed determination as she testified and helped the marshals piece together Briggs's crimes. They rarely spoke of what would come after. The present consumed their energy statements to give hearings to attend decisions about evidence. Yet the question hovered between them, growing more insistent as the legal requirements for their presence in Helena neared completion. On the 8th night, with Silas already asleep in the adjoining room, Elias found Annabeth by the fireplace in their shared sitting room. She wore a simple blue dress, purchased with an advance against the damages Judge Hollister had promised she would receive. The color matched her eyes perfectly. "Judge says we're free to leave whenever we want," he said, settling into the chair opposite hers. "Our testimonies are recorded, and they've found enough physical evidence to proceed without us being present for every hearing." Annabeth nodded, her gaze remaining on the flames. "Where will you go?" The question was deceptively simple, layered with unspoken meaning. Elias considered his answer carefully. "My place is gone. Briggs's men were thorough." He looked down at his hands, calloused from years of ranch work. "But the land is still mine. Could rebuild start over? Wouldn't be the first time." "It's good land," she agreed softly, "but lonely, especially for Silas." "Yes." He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "What about you? Will you go back to your springs?" Now she did look at him, always searching his face for something he hoped she would find. "My land is the most valuable thing I have. The only inheritance my mother could give me. I won't abandon it." "I understand." Elias nodded, trying to mask the disappointment that settled heavy in his chest. "But I don't want to live there alone." Her voice grew softer still. "I've had enough of solitude to last a lifetime, Elias. Enough of fearing shadows and sleeping with one eye open." Hope flared in him, cautious but insistent. "What are you saying, Annabeth?" "I'm saying my land has 3 springs. Enough water for multiple homesteads. Enough for a real community someday." She leaned forward, her gaze never leaving his. "I'm saying I'd like you and Silas to be part of building that community, if you want to." The offer hung between them, more significant than mere land or business. Elias recognized it for what it was, a beginning fragile but full of possibility. "Silas would like that," he said carefully. A smile touched her lips. "And what about you, Elias Boone, and what would you like?" In answer, he reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. The connection felt right, as natural as breathing. "I'd like to build something that lasts. Something worth fighting for." "So would I." Her fingers tightened around his. "Together, then?" Together. Spring came to Montana territory in a rush of melting snow and sudden greenery. The land Annabeth had inherited from her mother, 300 acres, cradling the precious year-round springs, transformed from winter's white desolation into a verdant promise. Wildflowers carpeted meadows where snowdrifts had stood just weeks before. and birds returned to nest in cottonwoods along the creek banks. Judge Hollister had been as good as his word. Annabeth's property rights were formally restored with significant damages awarded from Briggs's seized assets. Harlan Briggs himself awaited trial in the territorial prison, his empire dismantled, his name now synonymous with the darkest side of frontier ambition. Fletcher had turned state's evidence trading testimony about the earlier disappearances for a reduced sentence. The first thing Annabeth did with her reclaimed freedom was invite Elias and Silas to see the springs. The homestead cabin her mother had built was still there, abandoned but structurally sound. Together, they had repaired its roof and walls, replaced broken windows, and scrubbed away years of neglect. Now it stood ready for new life, smoke curling from its chimney into the clear spring air. On this particular morning, Elias stood on a rise overlooking the property, mapping out the locations for new construction, a proper barn, expanded corrals, maybe even a bunkhouse someday, if the cattle operation he and Annabeth had discussed became reality. Beside him, Silas knelt, examining early wildflowers, his curiosity about the natural world undiminished by their winter ordeal. Elias. Annabeth's voice carried from the direction of the cabin. Riders coming. He straightened immediately, hand going to the rifle slung across his back. Old habits died hard. But as the approaching riders came into view, tension eased from his shoulders. Nathan Packer led the small group, his printing press and supplies loaded on a wagon behind him. Right on time, Elias remarked to Silas. Better go help them unload. The boy was off like a shot, racing down the slope toward the arriving party. Elias followed more sedately, enjoying the sight of Annabeth emerging from the cabin to greet their guests. She moved differently now, confident, unafraid, at home in her own skin and on her own land. Welcome to Crow Springs, she called as Packer drew his wagon to a halt. It was the name she'd chosen for their fledgling community, a tribute to her mother and a declaration of her reclaimed identity. Quite a welcome party, Packer observed, nodding toward the cluster of tents and half-built cabins scattered near the largest spring. You've been busy. Indeed they had. Word had spread quickly after the Briggs trial began, fertile land with reliable water available for honest work. 3 families had already arrived, former tenants on Briggs's land, who had suffered under his tyranny and jumped at the chance for a fresh start. They were building homes, preparing fields for planting, establishing the foundations of a community that would be built on fairness rather than fear. The press arrived safely, I see, Annabeth observed, eyeing the heavy equipment in Packer's wagon. Every piece accounted for. The editor patted the printing press fondly. The Crow Springs Chronicle will publish its first edition next week, assuming we can get the office built in time. That had been Annabeth's idea, offering Packer land for a new newspaper, away from the burned ruins of his Pine Creek office. The territorial capital would soon relocate to Helena permanently, she had reasoned, and a growing settlement with its own newspaper would attract more families, more businesses, more opportunities for everyone. The office is framed already, Elias told him, gesturing toward a structure taking shape near the crossroads they'd established. Just needs walls and a roof. Plenty of hands to help with that. As they unloaded Packer's wagon, Marshal Clancy arrived with additional news from Helena. The trial was progressing rapidly, with more victims coming forward as Briggs's intimidation lost its power. 6 bodies had been recovered so far from unmarked graves on the outskirts of Twin Rivers Ranch. The missing settlers finally found. Judge says to tell you the land seizures are official. Clancy informed them, accepting a cup of coffee from Annabeth. Twin Rivers will be auctioned next month, with proceeds going to the victims' families and the territorial treasury. What about the springs there? Annabeth asked. They're part of the same watershed as ours, reserved by territorial decree. Clancy smiled at her surprised expression. Your testimony about the importance of reliable water made an impression. Governor signed an order protecting all natural springs in the region from private monopoly. It was more than they had dared hope for a systemic change that would prevent another Briggs from consolidating control of the area's most precious resource. Annabeth's eyes shone with unshed tears as she processed the news. As evening approached, the growing community gathered around a central bonfire to welcome the newcomers. Children played tag between the adults' legs, dogs barked at the excitement, and the smell of roasting venison filled the air. It was the largest gathering Crow Springs had hosted. 27 people now called this place home. With more expected as summer progressed, Silas had appointed himself tour guide, proudly showing Packer and the other newcomers around the settlement. And over there, they heard him explaining importantly, is where the school will be. Elias says I can help design the bookshelves. He's thriving. Annabeth observed, quietly standing beside Elias at the edge of the gathering. I worried about him after everything he witnessed. Children are resilient. Elias watched the boy demonstrating the settlement's water distribution system to an attentive audience. And he has something many don't purpose. He knows he's helping build something important. Aren't we all? She turned to face him, the firelight casting her features in warm gold. 6 months ago, I was declared dead, my inheritance stolen, my future erased. Now look. She gestured to the bustling community around them. Life from death. Hope from despair. Elias understood her wonder. His own journey from digging graves for coin to building a community seemed equally improbable. Yet here they stood surrounded by the tangible results of courage and perseverance. There's something I've been meaning to give you, he said, reaching into his pocket. Found it when we cleared the old barn for rebuilding. He opened his palm to reveal a small tarnished object, a wedding ring. Not his mother's silver band that now adorned Annabeth's finger, but a different one, heavy with painful history. My ring from the marriage to Briggs. She whispered, recognizing it instantly. I threw it away the night I discovered the poison. Where did you find it? Buried in the dirt floor near the south wall. He hesitated. I wasn't sure if you'd want it back. Could be worth something melted down. Annabeth studied the ring for a long moment, her expression thoughtful rather than distressed. Then, with deliberate movements, she took it from his palm and walked to the bonfire. Every eye followed her as she stood before the flames, ring held aloft. This represents what I survived, she said, her clear voice carrying to every ear. A prison disguised as marriage. A death planned by the man who vowed to cherish me. She looked around at the gathered faces, finding only understanding and support. But survival alone isn't enough. We must transform what tried to destroy us into something that strengthens our resolve. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed the ring into the hottest part of the fire. It disappeared among the coals, metal already beginning to soften in the intense heat. From this, she continued, pointing to the flames. We forged something new. A community built on honesty, mutual respect, and the simple belief that every person deserves the freedom to determine their own fate. A murmur of approval rippled through the gathering. Several people stepped forward to add their own symbols to the fire, a broken bridle bit from Briggs's ranch, a notice of eviction. One family had received a letter of debt, another had been unable to pay. Each item represented a chain, broken, a fresh start claimed. As the impromptu ceremony concluded, Silas approached with something clutched in his small hand, the twin to Annabeth's discarded ring. Found it when we were clearing the barn, he explained. Figured it was Mr. Briggs's. Elias and Annabeth exchanged surprised glances. The match set separated and then found by different hands seemed too meaningful to be coincidence. What should I do with it? Silas asked. Annabeth knelt to his level, considering the question seriously. That depends, Silas. Do you think it should be destroyed like mine or used for something else? The boy pondered, turning the ring over in his palm. Could we melt it down? Make something useful instead? Like what? Like a key. Silas looked up at them both, his young face suddenly sage beyond his years. For the school. So everyone can get in, not just people with money. Elias felt a swell of pride so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. Out of all the uses for gold currency decoration status, Silas had chosen the one that would benefit everyone equally. I think that's a fine idea. Annabeth said, her voice thick with emotion. A perfect symbol for what we're building here. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Elias and Annabeth stood at the edge of the largest spring, the heart of their new community. The water bubbled up from deep underground, clear and sweet, flowing outward to nurture everything it touched. Like the spring, their story would continue to flow, touching other lives, creating connections that might not have existed without that fateful moment when a struggling rancher chose to save a woman rather than bury her. I was hired to dig your grave. Elias mused, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the moonlight dance on the water's surface. Never imagined I'd be building a life with you instead. Annabeth leaned into his embrace, her head resting comfortably against his shoulder. Sometimes, the greatest gifts come from our darkest moments. She turned to look up at him, eyes reflecting starlight. I'm glad you heard me breathe. So am I, he whispered, bending to kiss her as the spring continued its eternal journey from darkness into light. In the empty grave where Annabeth might have ended, wildflowers now bloomed, nature's testament to life's persistence against all odds. And at Crow Springs, a community took root and flourished, built by hands that had learned the most precious truth of the American frontier. That true strength comes not from power over others, but from standing together against whatever darkness might come.